Good morning. Thank you for showing up for my presentation. I hope that it will be informative and insightful. I want to thank you, Tom, and thank you, Carol. It was a beautiful meditation. Infinite possibility. Yeah, that's what we're about. And thank you, Dan, for all the work behind the scenes. This guy, I'm telling you, he's a workhorse, and he knows his stuff. And I want to thank Deb Thompson and Alex Carr-Goodwin for helping me put this really good slideshow together today. The understanding that I'm going to be talking about today is can be seen as a radical new paradigm that would be very challenging to our already always thinking about how life works. And so I ask you to suspend your judgment. You can cancel that out afterwards. So a little bit of background. In my work as a coach, a whole lot of it has to do with collapsing our story and seeing our story for what it is, that it was something that we essentially just made up along the way. And so I'm not going to get deeply into my story, but I will go back a little bit to kind of inform you to how I got here and in the space that I occupy now. So I grew up on a farm in very rural Jim Crow, South Carolina. I went to a country church, and we would walk to church. It was just a mile away. Never missed a Sunday. Church was very much a center of our life. But I had a hard time navigating my childhood as my father was suffering from what we now call PTSD. The story goes that he had a Jeep shot out from under him when he was at, I think, the invasion of Normandy, I think it was. And so being the oldest son, one out of 5 kids, I received the brunt of his anger and like the environment of walking on eggshells, not ever knowing, what was gonna, like living with an alcoholic, not knowing what's next. And so it was very strict. He's very hardcore discipline. He practiced his military discipline on us. And so when I got out of high school, I was off to the races. I enrolled in a local college, moved away, started playing drums in a rock band. The name of the band was Satan and the Prophets. We wore Jesus sandals, they called them back then, made out of leather. But anyway, so it didn't set too well with my dad. So the next thing I know, he was taking me to Fort Jackson, South Carolina, to enroll me in the Army during the Vietnam War. And then all of a sudden, I found myself in Vietnam. I was very fortunate to have a position where I didn't have to go in the bush and get shot or shoot anyone. And then I went from there to Bangkok, Thailand. Tom and I were talking about that. He had an experience there with the Buddhist temples. The church I grew up in was just typical Old Testament, hellfire and damnation. I remember as a little kid, the church was heated by a coal stove. And the superintendent of Sunday school would get there before, like an hour before the service, and get the fire going in the wintertime. And so by the time we got there, the stove was red hot. Have you ever seen a red hot wood stove where it gets so hot the stove itself turns red? and these pipes, the stove pipes are coming out of the stove and working their way into the ceiling, and the stove pipes are red. And me and my buddies were sitting on the front seat next to the stove, and the preacher's in the pulpit, and it's so hot that he's already taken his jacket off, and he's got his handkerchief out, and he's patting his forehead, and he's talking about eternal fire and damnation. And we're sitting there with our eyes. That just gives you an idea of the type of conditioning, subjugation that I went through as a child. So when I got to Bangkok and was attracted to the Buddhist temples, it was something that was new to me. I found peace, found a sense of peace. And I liked it. It was nice. But I wasn't ready for that. I wasn't ready for that just yet. I got caught up in a group studying existentialism and nihilistic ideas, and we're born thrown into the experience. We didn't ask to be here. Victim. Spending my life doing whatever I do. At the end of my life, I'm dead, and it's the end of my story. All done. And so I really, in the victimhood mentality that I was living in, all that kind of made sense to me. So it set me off on a path of seeking, and I found myself attracted to a lot of New Age authors and teachers and Eastern thought teachers. Very popular at the time. This was during the 60s when things were really breaking loose with the Cultural Revolution. But I found that it just didn't work. It just didn't work for me. And then later, in hindsight, what I discovered was why it didn't work for me was that it's like affirmations. What I learned about affirmations is that you can say affirmations all day long, but if you have this programming in your subconscious mind saying to you, you're not worthy, you don't count, you don't matter, you're not good enough, and all these tapes playing in our head, the affirmation bumps into that and it bounces off. It has no effect. And so I'm going to move fast forward to discovering this understanding that I'm going to be talking with you about today, because it is through this understanding that I healed myself from PTSD, from my own PTSD. And at the Veterans Administration, they're saying, oh, there's no cure. You can manage it. You can take these drugs. You can do this or you can do that. But there's no cure, and you will be living with this the rest of your life. So I dispute that now because I'm a living example of that truth for me. One of the things that I experienced when I was a child in order to deal with this environment is that I experienced OBEs in my childhood, even though at the time I didn't know what they were. And then later, I had an opportunity to study with Leo Russell at Swananoa Palace. I lived there and worked there for her. She was a very hard taskmaster. And I studied with her. And during that time, I had an opportunity I answered an ad in the paper for volunteers to do something with this parapsychology department at University of Virginia with a guy named Dr. Ian Stevenson, and that kind of helped me to understand what it was that happened to me in my childhood, because it was familiar. And so I'm not a scientist. I am working on a dissertation in metaphysical science. I think I would, call myself more of a researcher. So metaphysics, for those of you who don't know, is it's a branch of philosophy that examines the basic structure of life. Is traditionally seen as independent, but some theorists view it as an inquiry into the conceptual framework of human understanding. Some philosophers, including Aristotle, designate metaphysics as the first philosophy to suggest that it is more fundamental than any other forms of philosophical inquiry. So this understanding is it's going to be challenging to your already always thinking about things. I remember at one time I had over 2,000 self-help books. And I could talk at cocktail parties all day long about how much I knew, when inside of me I felt empty and didn't feel like I really knew anything. So after leaving a career in advertising and publishing, I moved into the field of personal development, got into coaching, became certified in retirement coaching was my first field, and then I moved into other areas, expanding it out to other arenas. And now I'm working with veterans suffering with PTSD. We've been doing that for 5 years, and also suffering with TBI. And we're also in discussion with the Commonwealth Department of Corrections to bring our programs to the prisons. And so before I get started, I want to get a shout out. I saw Todd M. here, and I want to say hello, Todd. And Todd started out being one of my clients. He lives in St. Cloud, Minnesota, and we've never met. And now we've become very good friends, and I'm not sure anymore who the coach is. He's very helpful to me as well. So I'm glad to see you here today, Todd. So yeah, celebration of the return of Artemis and Earth Day. A lot of people are celebrating Earth Day today. Ron Garan, who spent 178 days aboard the International Space Station, returned to Earth carrying something far heavier than space equipment or the mission data. He returned with a transformed understanding of humanity itself. From orbit, Earth doesn't look like a collection of countries, borders, or competing interests, as a picture on the left shows. It appears as a single radiant blue sphere suspended in darkness. No lines divide continents. No flags mark territories. He often compares Earth to a spaceship, a ship carrying billions of crew members, all dependent on the same life support systems. And yet many behave as passengers rather than caretakers, assuming that someone else is responsible for keeping things running. The divisions we defend so fiercely on the ground just simply don't exist from above. Now, we heard some of the astronauts that just returned from space make similar remarks. And of course, this mirrors the epiphany that Dr. Edgar Mitchell had, which led to the IONS organization. Now, this guy here I found very interesting, and I'm going to tell a little bit about him simply because of what he has to say. Now, what he has to say is alarming, and at the same time that I'm not standing up here to be an alarmist. But I think it's important, and we put it into context of what I'm going to be speaking about and hopefully bring it around full circle for you. His name is Robert Friedland, and he's one of the 400th wealthiest people on the planet. And what he has to say is very sobering and concerning. Robert's early life grew up in Illinois to immigrant parents. His father survived 3 years in Auschwitz, while his mother worked as a forced laborer. And then they made their way to this country. Robert Friedland, when you start talking about billionaires, this doesn't fit the persona of billionaires that we like to beat up on. He was sentenced to 2 years in federal prison for possession of $100,000 worth of LSD. He received release on early probation, and the conviction was expunged in 1986. He graduated at Reed College. He was close friends with Stephen Jobs. They found they had a similar interest in spirituality, in Eastern spirituality. And Robert served on the weekends as a caretaker of an apple orchard south of Portland. And Jobs would come on the weekends and help him with the orchard, which served as the inspiration of the name Apple Incorporated. I thought that was interesting. Now, according to him, many of us are living in a bubble. Speaking about that earlier with I think, someone. We've been through the pandemic, and now we are in deep doo-doo as we look around. The physical condition, the physical experience, the human condition, which I call it. So according to him, we're disconnected from the harsh reality of what lies ahead. In his view, we are in for a rude awakening as global change and challenges, especially economic and environmental, continue to escalate. He warns that people need to wake up and understand the critical issues at hand, or they will be left unprepared for what's to come. Now, his comments aren't just about wealth disparity. He's also talking about the systemic changes that are reshaping our world, from climate change to automation to artificial intelligence. We are witnessing shifts that could completely transform the world as we know it. And for the average person, this may seem distant, may seem alien, that this is something that's coming from the future. But the time to confront these issues, he says, is now, because they've become too overwhelming to manage. He emphasizes that it's not enough to live in a fantasy where everything will be okay without action. The next decade could be one of unprecedented change, and it will be the proactive individuals, business and governments that are best prepared for the coming shifts. We are at a crossroads, and our collective decisions will determine the trajectory of future generations. This stark warning serves as a call to action for anyone who's complacent about the challenges ahead. It's easy to get caught up in the comfort of the present, but the truth is we must begin to adapt and change now. A failure to do so could leave us as unprepared for a future that promises to be more difficult than we had ever imagined. So to say that we are living in an unsettled time is an understatement, would you say? The world is changing rapidly, and if we are to be sustaining, we must shift and change with it. Linear time and linear perceptions that we were speaking about earlier are eroding. Artificial intelligence is compressing time as we know it. We are moving into an era of acceleration. In some ways, it looks like we're returning to the Dark Ages, a seeming failure of the old systems. But we have to ask, in what sense were the Dark Ages dark? And perhaps the lantern is to be found within human consciousness. And perhaps that is where the answers are to be found for today's incessant need for certainty. Some of the more enlightened beings on the planet are describing these shifts as a fundamental push or shove forward in universal consciousness. And so I've entitled my talk, Accessing Our GPS. I'm a big fan of the GPS theory. I left my house this morning feeling good. I'm planning on being here at the church at 8 o'clock to meet Dan and just be present to the environment here. And I'm coming down the boulevard and I get to Broad Street and boom, no through access. You cannot come this way. And so, what am I going to do? So, I accessed my internal GPS, and I just instinctively knew that I had to get on the interstate and I had to work my way over to Elwood, over to Carytown, and then take a right, and then boom, here I am. And so the GPS doesn't judge it doesn't judge us. It recalculates no matter how many detours you take. It finds another way forward. This understanding that I'm speaking about today works the same way. We make mistakes, we take a wrong turn, but the direction we are pointing in does not vanish. The route just takes a different detour. The direction our spiritual GPS is pointing towards is about coming home to a deeper understanding, a knowing of the truth of who we really are. This guy's name is Sydney Banks. Now, Sydney Banks was born in Edinburgh, Scotland in 1931. He was adopted and had a very difficult childhood, dropped out of high school in the 9th grade. He later moved to British Columbia, where he met his wife and worked as a welder in a pulpwood company. His in-laws, he went out to Salt Spring Island. His in-laws invited him to an awareness group. And on his way back, he had what he called an enlightening experience. he received a spiritual revelation of 3 principles that would explain the nature of the universe. Now, this was a guy who didn't read books. He didn't know anything about spirituality, philosophy, psychology. He began to talk about what he saw, and except for a few close friends, he was ignored and ridiculed. So in 1974, he quit his job and moved out to Salt Spring Island and ran a small ad in the local paper. The ad said, "For anyone seeking guidance through self-awareness, I am offering an informal, friendly type of group situation." One person showed up, a lady named Linda Queering. She'd just been recently released from a psychiatric hospital and told she would need medication and shock treatments periodically for the rest of her life. So Sid began talking with her, and she became free of all the medications and treatments. Never had to do any of that ever again. Within a couple of months, some other folks followed, all of whose lives were changed. Linda and Sid corroborated on the first book called Island of Knowledge, and another book by Linda, The Lost Teachings of Sydney Banks, was published in 2016. 2 prominent psychologists, Dr. George Pransky and Dr. Roger Mills, were encouraged to come and visit and meet Sid. And he began to consult with them for the development of a new paradigm for their work in the mental health field. And he didn't want 9th grade education. Nobody was going to listen to him. So he wanted someone to be out front and present his discoveries to the mental health community. They continued to work on what they call the psychology of mind, and Dr. Mills and Dr. Pransky both moved out to Salt Spring Island. Later on, the Minneapolis Institute of Mental Health was founded in 1983 as the second mental health organization to help people slowly through this understanding. Many other developments have occurred during the following years. In 1988, Roger Mills published Working with High-Risk Youth in Prevention and Early Intervention Programs Toward a Comprehensive Wellness Model. The Missing Link, Reflections of Philosophy and Spirituality, was published by Sydney Banks in 1998. And this book creates an appreciation for the mystical link between spirituality and psychology. Many other books followed by mental health professionals and authors, including a book you may recall called Don't Sweat the Small Stuff by Richard Carlson in 1997, and it spawned a whole series of books. In the same year, he and Dr. Joe Bailey, a 3 Principles instructor, published a book called Slowing Down to the Speed of Life, in which they sold 500,000 copies worldwide. But probably the most visible project and the most compelling project was called Modelo. In the mid-1980s, Dr. Roger Mills introduced Health Realization, a community-oriented presentation of the inside-out understanding to residents of Modelo and Homestead Gardens. These were 2 Florida housing projects that had become a haven for drug dealers and hotbeds of addiction, crime, and abuse. At first, the residents were suspicious of this man trying to point them toward clarity and well-being he claimed was already within them. They saw the horrific backgrounds that they lived in as the source of their problems. And of course, people slowly began to catch on and get a feeling for the direction Dr. Mills was pointing them toward. By the time the program completed, 2 years later, the community has seen a greater than 50% improvement in employment levels, school attendance, and parent school involvement. The drug dealers were gone, and there was a massive decrease in criminal activity. Residents had found their innate clarity and peace of mind. The experiment was repeated in Oakland's Coliseum and Lockwood Gardens, with the homicide rate in these housing projects going from being the highest in the city to 0, a level that they remained at for the next 10 years. In addition to the 0 homicide rate, violent crime dropped by 40%. In his 2021 book, Dr. Joe Bailey, called Thriving in the Eye of the Hurricane, he describes training programs that he and Dr. Keith Blevins, he was a psychiatrist and he was another pioneer in this understanding, created and delivered for the world-renowned Mayo Clinic in Arizona. These programs were designed to address burnout in physicians, and they showed impressive results. The programs were based on the principles we're exploring here, and Blevins and Bailey became pioneers in understanding of these principles. Participants in the surveys afterwards showed the following: 64% ruminate less about challenges in their work. 75% report that they rebound more quickly from adversity. 78% said this understanding was helpful in reducing stress and burnout. 79% are less emotionally reactive to other people and circumstances. They said they would recommend the program to their participants. And then they reported improved effectiveness, efficiency, and perspective, which facilitate better relationships with coworkers. They also find more ease in difficult conversations, better decision making, which leads to better teamwork, and improved work-life balance. Innate clarity, well-being, and resilience exist within each one of us. We already have it. We've just forgotten. It's our natural state. When we've got nothing on our mind, in fact, something we become particularly aware of, that there's nothing we need to do to have an awareness of innate clarity and peace of mind. It's more of a not doing, you see. Clarity isn't an achievement. It's not something we need to practice or work on. It's an expression of who we really are. The infinite creative intelligence of mind shows up in every aspect of our experience, gently pointing us towards clarity and well-being. The capacity for clarity is right here within each one of us, tirelessly working to guide us in the direction of our most inspiring, rewarding, and meaningful, successful lives. When we turn our attention away from the grinding familiarity of contaminated thinking, conditioned thinking, we make space for clarity and the powerful inevitability of fresh, new thoughts. So let's look at the discoveries. Thought. Thought is the gift we possess to create subjective, momentary images and words in our minds. This discovery suggested that the focus should be on the fact that we think, that we are the thinker, rather than on the content of the thinking. So they tell us that we have about 40,000 thoughts a day. I don't know where that number comes from, but that's what the scientists tell us. So what are these 40,000 thoughts? Most of them are the same 40,000 thoughts we had yesterday. And we become on this hamster wheel where we're recycling our thoughts, the same thoughts over and over every day. And most of it has to do with living in the past, recycling past upsets, angers, things that are going on in the world. So we call thought the reality principle. So what do we mean by thought? What I'm suggesting here is that thought is really everything. Any images, memories, anything that comes through our mind is thought. Emotions come in the form of thought. Perceptions, plans, insights, everything that comes through our mind is thought. Even pain. Now, what can be really hard to grasp about this idea is that 100% of our experiences are created by our moment-to-moment thinking. So there isn't anything that's in our thinking that's not in our experience, and there isn't anything in our experience that's not in our thinking. So thought is so pervasive that we are literally like fish in water, not being aware of the water. We so much live in the world of thought that it is hard to see that we think. That we think. We're so occupied with the content of our thinking. So we humans are literally swimming in the moment-to-moment thinking and feelings of our experience as it is being created. And most of these 40,000 thoughts are conditioned, contaminated thinking. So, discovery 2 is consciousness. Consciousness is pure awareness. It allows for the recognition of form to directly experience whatever we are thinking at any given moment. So consciousness is the gift of awareness that animates our senses, and it also allows us to be the observer of our thoughts. Thought without consciousness is like an old-time movie projector without the light bulb. We would have no way of being aware of the movie or experiencing it. So let's do this. Why this discovery matters. It is a common belief that our sensory data, our experience of life, comes from the forces outside of ourselves. And this is the radical thing here, is that what we're talking about here is an inside-out perspective versus an outside-in, that everything is happening in the world around us, and that's what creates our experience. Not true. It's only our thinking and our feeling that creates our experience. Thus, when people discover the nature of consciousness, they are empowered to take even the most compelling experiences in stride rather than overreact, creating worry and anxiety. And so, everything that comes into our senses, what we see, what we taste, what we smell, what we love, call them the seven wonders of the world: to hear, to laugh, to feel. This is how we receive data, right, from the outside world. It's the only way we receive data is through our sensory mechanism. So what happens is that we take consciousness, animates the thought, creates a feeling. We take it in as being real to us in the form of our stories, our beliefs, our stressors, our behaviors, and our picture of the world. All the images we see, all these images, what we hear, what we see, all tastes and smells, and every emotion that we experience, all of these are an expression of thought taking form. As long as we breathe, thought will be flowing through us. Now, I'm having to move through this really quickly. I was telling Carol earlier, I put together enough information to run a 2-day seminar. But when I started condensing it down, it became quite challenging. So discovery 3 is mind. Mind is the formless and universal intelligence behind all life. Universal mind. The ultimate power source that allows us to experience the mystery of life. So universal mind is like a projector, casting thought onto a giant screen. Then consciousness does its job and brings those thoughts to life, giving us a 3-dimensional, multi-sensory experience that we call life. And all of this is powered by the intelligence of universal mind, the infinite intelligence, which brings us to discovery 4. Principles. So what is a principle? The Oxford English Dictionary defines principle as a fundamental source or basis for something. When core scientific principles are uncovered, they expose a new paradigm which replaces the existing understanding, making it instantly obsolete. It creates an irreversible change. Examples in history include Louis Pasteur, known as the father of microbiology. He discovered the principles of vaccination, which contributed to germ theory. And after his first vaccine discovery, using the principles he discovered, he went on to develop vaccines for cholera, tuberculosis, and smallpox. Lavoisier was the father of modern chemistry. He revolutionized what had until then been a chaotic field with many fragmented ideas. He discovered hydrogen and oxygen. He created the first table of elements and formulated the basic laws of chemistry. Inventors and scientists struggled for centuries to create a flying machine. While we could see birds and insects flying, there was not an understanding or principles that would make flying possible. Then the Wright brothers discovered the principles of aeronautics and achieved the first manned machine-powered flight. This discovery has given us massive leverage to create things that couldn't even have been dreamed of previously. And now we're witnessing yet a return to space, and what the future beholds is impossible to even comprehend at this point. Now, you may say, hold on for a second. Gravity, you can measure gravity. Gravity is a principle. You can measure gravity. How can you measure thought, consciousness, and mind? Well, we don't actually measure gravity. We measure its effects. We know if you drop a pencil, it will fall to the floor. By observing falling objects, we can draw conclusions about gravity, as did Galileo and Newton. Similarly, we can't measure the principles behind mind, consciousness, and thought, but we can measure their effects. In fact, as one continues deepening their understanding of these principles, we begin to see effects on a daily basis. Now, until the principles of mind, consciousness, and thought were uncovered by Sydney Banks in 1973, psychology was a pre-paradigm field. But now we have causal laws which reveal a new paradigm that explains how our human experience works, and by inference, how it doesn't or cannot work. So this was the discovery that thought, consciousness, and mind together compose these three principles that exclusively and inclusively explain the nature of human experience. The three principles of mind, consciousness, and thought are the fundamental forces responsible for the creation of life and for all of our psychological experiences. These universal principles show us the unbending logic behind life, that our experience can only work from the inside out. And as we become more conscious of the inside-out paradigm in our day-to-day life, the benefits and implications are unlimited. The more that we look in this direction, the more you begin to have realizations, and some begin to create small positive changes, and some may rock your world. That's what happened to me. My world was rocked. The discovery 4. I want to get ahead of myself here. Why this discovery matters. And so I already said that there's been no established set of principles in psychology that explains our mental lives. Right now, I think from what my understanding is there's over 400 different modalities of psychotherapy. And most of them have to do with telling my story and dealing with what happened to me when I was 7 years old. And many of my friends who are in psychotherapy walk out of their appointments feeling worse than they did when they got there. No offense here. So realizing these three principles allows for resilience, taking our experiences in stride and trusting they will have the intelligent, responsive thinking to create. So, discovery 5, core feelings. Thought and feeling are one. It's very important when I became clear about this. Thought and feeling are one. They travel together. They are two sides of the same coin. We are always in the feeling of thought taking form from moment to moment. And thought is so brilliantly deceptive and creative, which is why we benefit so greatly from understanding how it really works. Have you ever noticed that when your head is clear and you are feeling lighter, things are easier, simpler, and more manageable? And in this feeling state, life seems more beautiful. People are great, funny, inquisitive. We appreciate small things, and we feel more at ease. So in contrast, when our head is full and cluttered, or we are in a low mood, things often seem more difficult, more complex. People can be annoying, selfish, irritating. Life is less beautiful, and feelings of appreciation are replaced with the uncanny ability to notice all that is wrong with my world and what's wrong with others and the world in general. So let's test it. Let's test it together. I want you to think of something sad. Just bring up something just sad. And try to have a happy feeling while you're thinking that. Now go ahead, give it a go. Now think about something that makes you feel good. And try to have a sad feeling while you're having it. What we feel can only come from thought in the moment. This is how the human operating system works. Thinking that our feelings come from somewhere other than thought in the moment is like blaming the car in front of you for my empty fuel tank. Life always shows up as a direct reflection of how we are thinking and feeling moment to moment. Now, the human psychological experience can be understood in terms of making a movie. Show you some artwork here, isn't that great? Your thoughts write the script, the story that looks like your truest reality. Your thoughts then act as director, determining how that script is going to be played out. Your thoughts decide the nuances that will be emphasized and de-emphasized in your life. The special effects of consciousness, bringing the script to life. Ironically, you're also the movie critic who passes judgment on how your life is going. Every person in your life is a character in your movie. It may seem as though their portrayal is independent from you, but your thoughts are creating how they appear. In other words, each character in your life is written by your thoughts into the script. For better or worse, you are also the continuous audience for your movie. Seeing the roles you play in your personal movie allows us to produce a better sequel that is done with wisdom and good feelings. Discovery 6. Now the projector, this is a great metaphor for the three principles and how the principles work. So mind, universal mind, is the power source. The tapes, the reels, depict our thoughts. The projector is consciousness, projecting out our lives. And according to these principles, this is how life is created. Levels of consciousness. Our level of consciousness, level of understanding life, can suddenly elevate to provide a better quality of life and relationships. This elevation is a built-in potential. It is the organic method of our evolution. Now, according to David Hawkins, anybody familiar with David Hawkins? Wrote the book in Power versus Force. The Anatomy of Consciousness is the subtitle. He points out that as our perception itself evolves from one's levels of consciousness, it becomes apparent that what the world calls the domain of causes, in fact, is the domain of effects. Now, this aligns perfectly with the principles of our thought-generated perceptual reality. We'll go into this a little bit more. And this comes from David Hawkins, the frequency, the vibrational frequency of each one of our emotions. And what we'll see is at the bottom, with hardly any energy at all, the very bottom one is shame, guilt and shame. We know about that. Shame is actually borders on death. It's about as close. It's only rating at 20 on the scale. It's about as close to death as possible. In fact, that's where a lot of suicides happen. Guilt and shame, a lot of the homelessness that we see. And then moving on up, grief, and fear, and desire, anger, pride, are all in what we refer to as the human condition. This is what's going on in the human condition. This is what's driving our thoughts, which drive our behavior. And at 200, it levels out with courage, neutrality, and willingness, and acceptance. We begin to raise our vibrational frequency toward a greater understanding, toward a greater depth of understanding, rising up the ladder into what I call our spiritual condition, our human condition versus our spiritual condition. And you have a question?
Is enlightenment. I would think someone on the far right would say enlightenment is totally different from somebody on the far left, their enlightenment.
Okay. I'm not understanding what you're meaning by far right and far left.
Politically, somebody who's very
politically,
conservative,
okay.
or somebody who's liberated or whatever. But
okay, all right.
I would think Putin's enlightenment would be different from the Pope's or whatever.
Okay. Well, that's a good question. It's an important question because that distinguishes what we're talking about when we're making the distinction between our human condition and our spiritual condition. What's going on in the world? All the events that are taking place in the world, the divisiveness, all the politics, politicizing, everything there is. If there's anything else to politicize, just wait around and it will be politicized. But that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about a higher level of consciousness, a higher level of understanding, a higher level of awareness, where we're vibrating at this frequency of love, joy, and peace. That's where we're vibrating. And those are the thoughts that are driving. Now we're having those thoughts. Okay, we're breaking out of our contaminated, conditioned thinking into a higher level of thinking, which consciousness now animates through our senses and creates a more joyous, more peaceful, more loving, more wisdom, more resilience, more mental well-being, lifestyle, outlook, way of being, how we are being in the world. Now, we can move up and down this chart in a heartbeat. I'll give you an example. It just happened to me. I was at the intersection of Staples Mill and Broad Street, and here's a guy on each corner with a sign, and I'm going, ugh. I immediately feel a sense of guilt. I can't give all of them money. And immediately upon seeing them, the emotion of guilt gets triggered in me. Okay? But then in my higher understanding, I immediately recognize it from the observer perspective. I immediately recognize what's going on, and I laugh at myself. And I actually happen to have some cash money in my pocket, and was able to share it with the guy that came up to my window. Made me feel good. So, any questions about this? Anybody? Tom?
Yeah, Andrew, in response to what Price's comment was, and it's been a couple of decades since I read David Hawkins, but it's good stuff, and this is all, of course, based on his wife's arm. But all the numbers, all the elements between, or the emotions, or whatever you want to call them, between lower than 200 are based on issues of separation.
Yes.
Those 200 and above start to get more and more levels towards integration, connection. And so almost all political perspectives, at least that in politics as we know it, are below 200.
Correct.
So they're all about separation, where as you go above that, you get to enlightenment, you're not dealing with political perspectives at all.
Exactly.
So.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah. Thank you, Tom. Sure. Yeah, so we begin to move into this sense of oneness and connection with one another. Now, over the last century, move on here. Over the last century, the field of psychology has debated whether psychotherapy is a science or an art form. This raises the question, what is it that makes a discipline a science? The commonality among the accepted sciences, such as mathematics, physics, and chemistry, biology, or engineering, or architecture, is that each of these scientific disciplines has a consistent, uniform set of underlying principles which apply to all the phenomena in that field. We have assumed that physics and chemistry are assured the status of a science by virtue of the fact that phenomena studied in those fields are observable and measurable. Yet more often than not, they deal with phenomena that's not directly observable to the senses at all. One might conclude then that there must be more to making a discipline a science than the nature of the subject matter. So what do these scientific fields have in common that is missing in the field of psychology? And the answer is that psychology has been lacking in an underlying, fundamental, consistent set of principles that lead to predictable results. Now, this is a powerful statement here. William James, considered the father of American psychology, I think, is that correct? So what did he mean by this statement? William James, quote, suggests that understanding human psychology is key to transforming society. He is implying that once we grasp the fundamental principle of psychology, we'll be able to make significant changes to human behavior and society as a whole. Once psychology discovers its true principles, it will change humanity more than the discovery of fire. Now let that sink in. In essence, William James believed that our thoughts and attitudes shape our reality. This perspective is reflected in his quotes, such as the greatest revolution of our generation is the discovery that human beings, by changing their inner attitudes of their minds, can change the outer aspects of their lives. His idea is that by understanding human psychology, we can unlock human potential and create positive change and move towards this idea of infinite possibility that Carol spoke about in her meditation. Insightfully understanding what's behind the scenes of our experiences, seeing the nature of thought, can lead to a profound transformation, clarity, security, and peace of mind. So we are all searching for a home, for our home grounds. We're searching to find the way home. But to find the way home, what we have to do is look at everything in reverse. Because naturally, if we walk further away, we're going to get further away from home. So in order to find our home, we've got to turn around. We've got to go in the opposite direction. And instead of searching outside of ourselves for the answers we seek, all we do is turn around and look inside. And there lie the secrets that we are seeking. This is from The Best of Two Worlds, another Sydney Banks book. Realizing these principles bring hope that you already have what you need to wake up out of the illusion, ego-bound thinking, the ego-bound, contaminated thinking, and its temporarily created unhappiness. We already have within us a space of awareness that is free of the influence of limited conditioned thinking. And whenever we touch this space, we experience love. We experience wisdom. This hope allows us to celebrate being human. The human part of being human is that we have all kinds of thoughts and feelings, and they come and go. That's always going to be true. It's like having all kinds of internal weather. Sometimes the sun shines, sometimes it rains. This is always going to be true. But often, you, like the rest of us, will forget that we're part of something much greater than ourselves. That we are one with the infinite intelligence behind all life. Now, this intelligence doesn't care that we have different kinds of weather, just like the sky doesn't care if it rains or snows. Weather is just what happens within the sky. All kinds of weather are going to be present. And the more you see the impersonal truth of this truth in terms of our thought content, the more at ease we become. It's like looking at the weather and not judging it. It's not like the sun is good and the rain is bad. Having different kinds of weather is part of life. Coming home is embracing all of your humanity. And when we don't fight against ourselves, we can be more at peace in the midst of experiences, including worry, self-doubt, anxiety, and all kinds of internal weather. When we are resting in the space of pure being, we attach less meaning to the comings and goings of the weather. It was normal to have weather. It's just what's so. Being home is knowing that you are one with something far greater, and it is having faith, or more a knowing, a capital K-N-O-W-I-N-G, a knowing that the blue sky is always right behind the clouds. The sun and wisdom are always there, ready to shine as soon as your clouds dissolve. Realizing the richness of these principles reveal our true home. All three principles point towards a richness that can be more fully experienced and known as we dive deeply into the experience of each principle. The three principles together add a fuller sense of responsibilities. Each principle is like a separate musical key, but when brought together, it allows innumerable symphonies to be created. All three principles point toward the same vast inner space. But this inner space is completely empty. Being in the presence is completely empty. Yet it gives birth to all that has existence in the world of forms. So it is an emptiness that simultaneously creates the full range of any experience that we can or will have in our life. Now, I would love now for you to immerse yourself experientially into the depths of your inner being. Even now, as you listen to my words, in a moment of inner stillness and heightened awareness of your own inner being, you may actually be able to sense and intuit this quiet space within you. You may be able to notice that all of your thoughts, images, feelings, and sensations arise out of this space. When we are immersed in this space, our sense of self may momentarily dissolve. All that remains is the coming and going of our sensory experiences. While immersed in this experience, you're not thinking about or conceptualizing anything about the principle of thought. You are actually experiencing this principle directly, unmediated by concepts or beliefs. We are simply being in a moment of absolute attention to this inner space. We may also become aware of your awareness itself. This pure consciousness is silently aware of all that arises as objects of experience. This awareness is untouched by what it is aware of. When resting in pure consciousness, we're able to be aware of the coming and going of any thought and feeling without being identified with it. And there is a personal freedom in having this relationship with our thinking and feelings. There is a freedom in not being identified with the content of our experience. At some moment, you may experience that this pure consciousness is who you really are. And as you become more familiar, in a moment of silent awareness, you can intuit the very source of creation. There is a feeling of aliveness and a sense of infinite possibilities. There is no sense of a separate self. Tom pointed this out. There is only the existence of oneness. There is a knowing of wisdom and love. There is a knowing that within each one of us, we have innate wisdom, innate resilience, innate love, innate peace, innate mental well-being and mental health. This is a glimpse of the principle of universal mind. As we become more familiar with immersing ourselves in this inner space, we naturally begin to experience gratitude for the creative nature of thought, the freedom of pure consciousness, and the wisdom of universal mind. And so it is. I'm going to have a little closing meditation now to kind of bring all this together. And if you would close your eyes, you'll have a better experience. It's not necessarily to do so. Just take a deep breath. And as we exhale, we're exhaling love. And let's take another deep breath. Inhale, love, and exhale, love. Now imagine or visualize a beautiful cloudy day against a deep blue sky with a breeze gently blowing the clouds on by. Our thoughts, our moment-to-moment thinking are much like the passing clouds. So just allow them to pass on as they emerge and seek to distract us. Just release them and just let them pass. It is in the stillness of the silence, like this holy hush around us, that spirit does its work. So let us take this knowing now as we rest gently and lovingly in just a moment of silent contemplation. And now, as we re-enter the world of our outer senses, notice the chair beneath you, feet on the floor, mighty currents of healing love is flowing through me now. Renewing and restoring every fiber of my being, leaving me whole, perfect, and complete. We make this so, and so it is. Eyes wide open, wide awake, feeling better than before. Thank you.
How your paradigm and principles differ from the paradigm discussed by Ernest Holmes, Book of Science of Mind.
Okay, please comment how your paradigm and principles differ from the paradigm discussed by Ernest Holmes in the book The Science of Mind from 1926. I studied science of mind for a long time, and it's great. It's an approach, just like the Course in Miracles is an approach. If it works for you, then by all means, you continue.
Looks like Lindley has his mic open.
Hello. Hello. This is Lindley Smith. That was a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful presentation, and I'm very, very gratified. But this is sort of off the subject. It has to do with life, but off the subject. This is personal, and I'm seeking every answer I can get. For about 6 months now, I have been having severe tinnitus, and I was wondering if you had any kind of, I know it's an incurable disease, if you had anything to ease or thoughts or principles that I could adapt to ease up this tinnitus. I can't sleep. I can't do much of anything now. It's very debilitating.
Yes. And I understand that tinnitus is common. I had my audiologist give me a test for tinnitus, and apparently it's endemic to the COVID shots, is what the Veterans Administration has been experiencing. The only way I can answer that question is to say that this is something that's happened in your body. And so what we're doing with this understanding is we go back before form. We're talking about before form takes place. And it's in that space, and there are others probably here more versed in this, whereby healing can take place. So it's easy to want to put it outside of ourselves and listen to what the doctors are saying, like they did with my PTSD. They said it was incurable and it was annoying and caused me lots of problems. But I solved it. I solved my problems, and I heal myself through an understanding of how it works. So I hope that will be helpful to you, and I appreciate your comments. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
I believe during your talk you mentioned seeing somebody outside the window of your car who was begging for money, and you gave him money, and it made you feel good. From what I understand, the quote-unquote experts say that's bad because that encourages them to stay out in the streets begging rather than going into the shelter where they get food and clothing and help. And it's kind of similar, I think, to the shelters themselves, where they say to stay in the shelter, you've got to be looking for work. You just can't come here and live and eat free without trying to help yourself. So anyway, I guess it's the question of what makes you feel good versus what's good for the general population.
That's a good question. Thank you. That's not my experience, what's going on in the world. I can have empathy. I can give money where I can. I can give love where I can. That's really all we can do, is to surround these folks with love. Everybody is where they're at on the scale of consciousness. Everybody's where they're at on the scale of evolution. Now, what we contribute this to, Carol is going to be going more into the reincarnation aspect of it. It helps us to have a deeper understanding of where our experience is coming from, where it originates from past lives, karma that we bring into this experience from past lives. And we don't know what that person's experience is. We just know that they're down on the bottom rung of that ladder of consciousness. And all we can really do at the end of the day is surround them with love and let them know that we love them.
Thank you. Yeah, I hate to use the term, but I've heard the term tough love, which I guess is what I was talking about.
It's a good word. Sometimes we all have to practice tough love with our kids